بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome back everybody, inshallah, to the Friday session, which has changed now. It was previously Saturday, which is now Friday between Maghrib and Isha, named Ask Me Anything. And we are in hopes, inshallah, with the help of Allah, and may Allah and give us sincere intentions that we're able to build a community where people can come to the masjid and discuss and talk about anything without feeling like they're being ostracized, without feeling uncomfortable. The most comfortable place that everyone should feel is in the masjid, and the most comfortable people should feel comfortable with their believing brothers and sisters in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. This is the intention behind all of this. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq. And if I can just give you a brief summary of initiatives which have been taken place in many masajid through history and up until now. Someone had mentioned to me that is it okay to discuss politics in the masjid? And politics has many meanings to many different people, but in Islam, to give you the highest level of policy making in politics is a courtroom. Everything funnels through as far as a justice system is concerned, and we refer that to a court, like with a judge, a qadi, and in some places there's juries and whatnot, and certain type of cabinet members for legality. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to conduct cases in the masjid, his masjid, of him being the judge, obviously, and also seeking nasiha from his sahaba, but also decisions of foreign policy and of whether it be internal affairs would be conducted in the masjid of Rasulullah ﷺ, because that would be considered the best place. Now, there's certain type of political initiatives that may take place that may not be directly connected to Islam. What do I mean by that? Rasulullah ﷺ himself was the leader and the statesman of the Muslims, especially after the migration of Medina. So anything that was taking place in the masjid there was considered revelation. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about Muhammad sallallahu says, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. Muhammad sallallahu doesn't speak from his whims and his desires. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. It is rather revelation revealed. So when Muhammad sallallahu speaks in matters of deen, it is revelation. So there may be political-esque questions that come up. Don't worry, we're not doing anything haram. And if it is getting to that level, inshallah, I'll ask Allah to give me good judgment to put the brakes on certain things. But there's nothing wrong with discussing political issues in the masjid as long as it's being conducted in a way of nasiha and adars. Someone may say that Rasulullah said that we shouldn't be discussing worldly matters in the masjid. Yes, that's true. Worldly matters meaning buying and selling, right? If I'm in the back of the masjid and I'm discussing with brothers, hey, this thing is on sale, these new Nikes dropped, did you guys check these out, and the resale, and I'm thinking of buying them and reselling them, that kind of talk, or talk about, entertainment issues that are happening in the world, in popular culture, that is not supposed to be taking place in the masjid unless there's a question asked about the validity about something in popular culture, and then we discuss that in the masjid. Do you guys understand the differentiation, inshallah? So that's something I think that needs to be made clear. And I'm just keeping an eye on this. I'm sorry, there's just some new questions coming in, and I'm going to put a cap on this for right now, if you guys don't mind. So I'm not scrolling through my text messages or anything else right now. I'm just taking a look at some of the questions that may have popped up recently. So let's talk about one of the first questions. Let's start off with something light, something more related to the ibadah. One of the questioners asked regarding salah, How do I maintain my khushu' in salah? And what are some easy tips for you can advise people to be better with their salah, meaning their prayer, 5 daily prayers, and that they can implement instantly? So there's a few things, inshallah, that can be implemented instantly, and some things that are to be a developmental issue with our salah. Let me start off by saying this. There is no believer in this world, wallahu alam, that I know of that's fully satisfied with their salah. None of us. Any of us who claim that we had the perfect salah, that itself is a sign that we have to work on ourselves and our salah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to us 5 times a day for the rest of our lives, with the exception, if you're traveling or weather permitting, of combining your prayers at a certain time, right? But 5 appointed prayers, I should say, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, and it is a lifelong work in progress. So if you feel that, hey, I'm 30 years old, I'm 20 years old, I'm 60 years old, I'm 80 years old, and I'm not okay with my salah, alhamdulillah, that feeling is an act of worship to Allah, that you're still not okay with your salah. So that's just something I just wanted to put out there. So the first thing is something instantly that you can work on, and things that may take longer. Let's start off with those things that are much faster. Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah, who's a contemporary of Imam Abu Hanifa, who's from the Tabi'een, meaning generation after the Sahaba, was asked, how do you concentrate in your salah? How do you develop khushu' in your salah? And he said, and some narrations are there, it's not only Hasan al-Basri that said this, it's other from the Tabi'un that said this, or Wallahu alam, some of the Sahaba, but it's documented, and it's a beautiful advice, is he said that when I pray, I imagine that I'm on the sirat, meaning on the day of judgment. I imagine that I'm standing in front of the sirat, and I imagine that the Kaaba is in front of me, and I imagine on my right side is Jannah and on my left side is Jahannam, and I imagine that the angel of death is hovering above me to take my soul as soon as my salah is finished. Now someone could think, wow, for salah that seems really drastic, I have to think of all of that before my salah. No, this is from the people of the pious generations, the ones that Rasulullah, he said that my generation is the best, ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ, then the ones that come after them, and the ones that come after them. I'm giving you the mindset of the original believers in Islam. This is how they considered their prayer, not because they always wanted to be scared, is because they valued Allah, and they knew that they could die at any moment. How many of us have heard, and you can raise your hand, the Imam announcing before the salah saying, pray as if this is your last prayer? Because this is the practice of the Prophet. Once in a while used to say this, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Sahaba. This is a practice of Umar radiallahu anh. And when they were leading people in prayer, they felt a sense of responsibility that the people that are praying behind me also, we want to make sure that everyone is seeing this the way Rasulullah used to see this, right? So they say, pray as if this is your last prayer, because it can be, because we don't know what's going to happen, right? So that's one thing. The mindset is number one. You can imagine that, the angel of death is going to take your soul after this. Or you can just imagine, very, very simply, that the second step is that you are directly communicating with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though you're in a jama'ah. You're praying in jama'ah, Allah is looking at everybody individually. And this is your communication with Allah, and it's very difficult to sometimes zone out of this busy world that we have. So the second or third piece of advice is, a misconception is the khushu' of your salah doesn't begin with your takbir al-tahrima when you say Allahu Akbar, or with the iqamah. It begins with your wudu in preparation for the salah. So the concentration of your salah begins in the preparation of your wudu, right? And you obviously contemplate actions of washing your face, that Allah is wiping away sins from your face. What could you have done with your face, right? Your eyes are connected to your face, right? When you're rinsing your mouth, what things did you say? And that you need to ask forgiveness for. What did you tell a lie? Were you talking about somebody? Did you even use your face as a facial expression? Allah tells us this about the Quran. Don't even use a facial expression to people, because that can be a sign, that could be a type of backbiting, right? Your hands and your arms, what did you use your hands for? Did you use it to strike somebody intentionally or unintentionally, for the sake of haram or not? Did you use those to control somebody, right? Did you wash your feet going in a place which is haram, or walking to a place that displeased Allah, or walking in a manner of arrogance that displeased Allah? All of this begins before the salah. If the believer gets into this habit of prepping for the salah, i.e. the wudu, then walking to the salah in the state of dhikr, and then preparing, meaning for instance praying tahiyatul masjid before the salah, these are all, if you want to think of as warm-ups to khushu' and your meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And the last thing I'll say about this point is, if we think that we could talk about the things that are pertaining to this world, and we hear the Imam say Allahu Akbar, and we say Allahu Akbar, and think that your mind's not going to be wandering in the salah, no, that's not how we work as human beings. There's very few people that have an on and off switch for our thoughts. Very few human beings can instantly get into something and not be distracted by anything else, right? And if you have those methods, please come to me, because I have a hard time concentrating too, and instantly turning the switch off. The next is something that's also very, very a part of, now we're talking about things that making a project out of ourselves in preparation for our salah. Think about this principle. Anything that you do outside of the salah will affect you inside of your salah. As a believer, anything you do outside of your salah will affect you inside of your salah. Because shaitan knows that this is the 5 minutes that this person has, right? And it starts from a young age. Don't think that shaitan doesn't affect us and our children before the age of puberty. Just because our sins count starting from the age of puberty or right after, it doesn't mean that shaitan doesn't work on us. What's the hadith of Rasulullah of why the child cries after the birth? As soon as the child is born, he screams. The hadith is what? Who knows this hadith? Why does the child scream? It's because the qareen, the personally designated shaitan, pinches the child to just taunt the child, right? So the qareen and the shayateen are following us from a young age. Why am I mentioning this? Many of us will say, mashallah, we have amazing things to say about our children, right? And some of our children are very brilliant, and some of them are very sharp, right? But why is it that they know, and we have to tell ourselves up until our current age, and children, that the salah is only 4 minutes, it's only 5 minutes, don't worry, it'll be over before you know it. That's what we sometimes have to use as an incentive to distract shaitan away from the child, right? Just my 6-year-old, I tell him, hey, we have to pray, when we're praying Salat al-Asr. And when I take him to the masjid for Jum'ah or whatever the case is, Abu, when is this going to end? Before it even begins. And sometimes I'll choose a masjid that's very child-friendly, and the salah, they'll see that there's elderly and children, they'll finish, Salat al-Dhuhr or Salat al-Asr within 5 or 6 minutes. And then they can go and play in the back of the masjid. So let's just say the child comes in, like my son, I'll use him as an example. He's playing in the masjid before the prayer, and there's only a 5-minute Asr, and he doesn't want to do that Asr, but he wants to continue playing. Now, that's not just child behavior. We can't be fooled by that. We have to understand that shaitan has a great deal to do with that, because he knows that it's going to affect our khushu' also in our salah, because we brought our children to the masjid. Right? So what happens now? We have to tell our child, it's only 4 minutes. I'll get you this. I'll take you to Oberweis. I'll do all this just for one salah. Right? And we're willing to do that for our children. Rasulullah said what? As-salatu ala waqtiha khayrun min ad-dunya wa ma fiha. The salah on its appointed time is better than this world and everything it contains. Right? So the reason why I mention all of this is shaitan is going to utilize, even though we know it's 5 to 8 minutes of salah, that 5 to 8 minutes of salah will seem like hours to children and to us. Right? Ask anybody on a winter day who doesn't have adequate heating in their home to wake up in the winter to only have cold water and not have warm water for wudu for Salat al-Fajr. How difficult is that? Right? Like taking that blanket off and that comfort and the warmth is like bench pressing 1,000 pounds off of your body, even though it only weighs half a pound. Right? And that's from the waswas of shaitan and from our own weaknesses too. So, one thing that we definitely have to realize is the actions outside of our salah will give shaitan more ammunition to work with us inside of our salah. So there's 4 things that we can generally work on, which work all across the board for our ibadat. And those are 4 barriers that some of you may have heard that when I've talked about this before, that we build between us and Allah. Number 1 is overeating and eating to our extreme full. When you overeat, not only does it weaken your body and soul, but it weakens your ability to want to pray and worship Allah. How many of you have went to a da'wat, right? And you can raise your hand, it's okay. Where you had a really big dinner at a shadi, right? Or a wedding. And you forgot to pray Isha and you come home and you have to pray. And you're tired and your stomach's full and all you want to do is go to sleep, right? It makes it that much more difficult. So much so that we just say, oh, I just got to finish this. I just got to get over with this prayer. As if it's just some fly and you just swat it away. That's what eating does, and overeating, which is why we have to be very careful, right? And how much we consume, especially before the salah, and especially at nighttime before Salat al-Isha, right? Chai is good because it has caffeine in it. So please consume chai before Salat al-Isha so you can have some activity and some energy, inshallah. The second is also your companionship. The companions that you hold outside of salah will bring shaitan as your companion inside of salah, right? And desensitize you to the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 3 is misuse of the tongue. How you misuse your tongue outside of the salah, that use of the tongue of the Quran in the salah will have very little effect inside of your salah. And 4th, and maybe most importantly, especially in this age, is lowering the gaze of, which was generally healthily and explained as the opposite gender, of lowering your gaze, because the way that the gaze works to the opposite gender is that if it's not utilized properly, meaning if the eyesight that Allah gave us is not used for what He wants us to use it, those things will consume us within our salah, and lusts for the opposite gender will consume us in our salah, because that's what shaitan is reaching for ammunition to distract you for the 5 to 10 minutes you have in your salah, even though we have 24 hours in a day, right? So even if it's a stretch, let's say that every prayer you spend 10 minutes, and out of the 5 daily prayers, how many minutes is that altogether out of 24 hours? Right? It's not a lot. It's not even an hour. But even if you pray short prayers, let's say you pray individually at home, and you say you finish all of your 5 salawat within 25 minutes, accumulatively, what is 25 minutes in 24 hours? Why does it seem so much to us? Because shaitan is real, and our weaknesses are real, and our nafs is real. Now, one more thing I can give you as far as implementing, not instantly, but to work on, is many of the scholars of the past just talked about some very, very simple things. If you happen to be praying by yourself and you pray at home, now this may seem very oversimplistic to some people, but it works and it helps. I've tried it and many people have tried it. Try to use a prayer mat or a carpet that is a single color with no designs on it. Either a white sheet or a black sheet. A majority of us, and I'm guilty of this too, I'm not afraid to admit that, whenever there are designs in front of us, we start making pictures out of those things while we're praying. Or maybe it's just me, you know what, maybe I have the severe ADD or ADHD, maybe none of you guys have that. But we do, and sometimes that's why if you need to close your eyes once in a while you're praying, it's not suggested that you do. From the adab of the salah, it's to look forward in the place of your sajda. But if it's for reasons of concentration, sometimes it's okay to close your eyes. But if you're praying individually and at home, try to use a blank sheet, a blank sajada or a sheet to pray on. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. There's nothing great about having a super fancy sajjada, or as we say in Urdu, a janimaz, to make sure that you're giving your salah respect. Sometimes it's just best to have something very blank because it's better for your concentration. And lastly, but most importantly, we have to try our best to make a goal, at least for the surahs that we read regularly. Let's say I only know 10 surahs and Surah Al-Fatiha, so it's 11 surahs. The last 10 surahs of the Quran is Surah Al-Fatiha. Know the meaning of what you are reading. It will mitigate lots of waswas to you. It's not going to mitigate everything. Study those 10 surahs, or even, let's say, 5 surahs in the Quran that you're going to read over and over in your salah, especially when you're alone. Make sure you concentrate on the understanding of that. The next step above that is learning the Arabic language don't fall into the dilemma of I have to be able to speak Arabic. No, there's many people who understand the Quran but they can't speak the Arabic language. One of the founders, if you want to say, the masters of Arabic grammar was somebody by the name of Sibawayh, who has basically codified in the most elaborate and one of the forefathers of Arabic grammar, if you want to say, وَكَانَ يَتَلَحَّنُ. He used to have an accent in his Arabic when he used to speak. He wasn't Arab, right? He used to actually have an accent from his own language of Persian into the Arabic language when he used to speak it, right? So there's no such thing as you have to perfect the Arabic language to learn it. It will actually make your project, and this is the last thing I'll say, I apologize. It'll make your project of the Arabic language a lot easier that if you understand the Arabic language for the sake of understanding it only and not speaking it. Speaking it's a whole different thing. You have to live amongst people and that speak the Arabic language and all that. You don't have to do all of that. I know many people who learned in the United States, being from an African background, being from an Indian background, being from a Russian background, that learn the Arabic language, meaning when they hear the Quran, they understand it without ever traveling to the Muslim world. And it's very doable. Very, very doable, right? I know a sister who's at the age of 60 right now, or past the age of 60, who learned the Arabic language and started memorizing the Quran. And if you actually look into people in the community, there's many people that are actually doing this, right? It's never too late. I'm going to do one more question from here, and then we could take a question from somebody in the crowd, inshallah. Somebody asked a great question. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create us and have us go through all of this, meaning hardship, when He doesn't get anything out of it, subhanahu wa ta'ala? Meaning, why would Allah create us and have us go through many trials and tribulations, even for the acts of worship that we have to do, and Allah doesn't get anything out of it? Also, what should we do when we think about questions like, how was Allah always just there? And what was before Allah? It's a great question. You know, we just sacrificed animals for Eid al-Adha. And we also do sacrifices, you know, for our aqiqahs and stuff. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, in reference to just, I know that the person wasn't asking about this in specific, but it's a beautiful thing that sometimes maybe we don't think about that will help us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, says, لن ينال الله. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not benefit. And yanal for human beings, or al-munawala, taking upon something, can also be consumption of something or eating. لحومها, its meat, ولا دماؤها, and not its blood. ولكن يناله التقوى. But rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is concerned with your consumption of taqwa, right? So the animals that we sacrifice and the blood that's emitted from those animals is not going to benefit Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is telling us straightforward, I'm not benefiting from this. I am looking at your taqwa, your consciousness of me, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. and your fear that you have of being disloyal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? In a nutshell, that's what taqwa is. It's not just fear. It's fear of being disloyal to Allah and fear of standing in front of Allah and not being an obedient slave to Allah, but also being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The questioner also understands from this, and we all do, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us to do something, it's only for our benefit. It's not for Allah's benefit. We are used to, as human beings, living in a very capitalistic, like hyper-capitalistic society and hyper-consumption, that everything we do, even every step we take for the sake of something, we have to be compensated for it. Right? If I'm going to go somewhere to do something, there has to be some if I'm going to give somebody a business idea, I want to make sure my time is compensated for because they're benefiting from my services, right? There's nothing that we can do to avoid this mindset now. It's all around us. Everything has to do with how can I capitalize on this sense or start this in order to capitalize monetarily. Some of those things are very halal to make money off of, and some of those aren't, right? But that's a whole different concept. Why am I mentioning this? Is sometimes we ourselves are used to consuming and over-consuming and compensating people for something that we think, and we project that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And we think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created us and He's asking us to do something. I, as a human being, I'm drawing an analogy. I make something of service for me, whether it be a laptop or a computer, or I invent something, and I expect it to serve me, right? Because it benefits me, because it makes my life easier. That's what ingenuity and invention is for human beings, right? For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, creating us is not a source of ingenuity for making Allah's life easier. That concept is for us human beings. That concept doesn't exist for Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to test us. Allah created life and death just for the sake of testing us to see who are best in our actions. And let me say to you that Allah is the only one that can create, because He's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doesn't have to have a reason. Allah doesn't have to have a reason. And Allah doesn't have to benefit. That's for us. Benefit is for us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who created all of us and all these systems of benefit, created us, and He told us why He created us. And He doesn't have to have a reason. And that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But by extension, if I may, have we ever wondered why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talked about ihsan upon our walidain, upon our parents, right? And not associating partners with Allah together in verses in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran talks about being good to your parents and not associating partners with Allah. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, right? Don't commit shirk, and وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. And make sure that your ihsan doesn't just mean being good. Ihsan in this sense means the perfection of which Allah expects you to have with your parents. And may Allah make us amongst those people, but we're always falling short to our parents. We can never fully repay, especially our mothers, we can never fully repay our mother and our father for anything that they've done for us, right? Why am I mentioning this? As parents, when we ask our child to do something, even though we know it's beneficial for them, how many of us said, I probably say this on a daily basis to my children, and I know my parents said this to me, and their parents said this to them, and it goes all the way back, because Allah created us with this as a sign to go back to Allah. How many of us said to our parents, I don't have to give you, how many of us said to our children, I don't have to give you a reason, just do it? Have any of you said that to your children ever in your life? Yes. Me, I'm going to tell you, I do this on a daily basis, and I have to sometimes. Because the children are not going to learn right now. They're going to learn when they have children. So sometimes we teach our children for the sake of when they have children. How many of us know, and I'll tell you this, I'm going to use myself as an example, a majority of everything my parents told me, especially when they said you're going to learn when you have children, when I'm telling my children, I hear my parents echo in my ear while I'm telling my children that. On a regular basis. And wallahi, everything that my parents told me that you're going to know when you have children, wallahi, every single one of those to the T occurred and still occurs up until this day. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, look how beautiful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to us. He gives us in this verse, in Surah Luqman and many other verses in the Quran, of worshiping Allah, not associating partners with Him, and being good to your parents. As if you're good to your parents, it's very easy not to associate partners with Allah. And if you understand the wisdom of your parents, you're not going to fall into shirk, the way Allah wants you to respect your parents, right? So if that's the case with us as parents, because I've heard fathers ask this question before, and it's great to ask this question, but especially to fathers and mothers, if this idea ever comes to you on a worldly level of why does Allah expect us to do something when He's not going to benefit from it, know that if you have children, you're asking them to do it on a regular basis. So are we more special than Allah to have expectations of our children when Allah has expectations of us? No. And from an obedient child, as long as the parent isn't asking them to do something haram, the child has to listen, no matter how old they are, right? If the child, and this is something we should teach our children, that if I'm asking you to do something that Allah has prohibited, you have to accept it. But if I ever ask you to do something haram, never listen to me. If we tell this to our children, they're going to know, you know what? My parents really respect me. My parents actually really love me, because when it comes to Allah, there's no compromise for them. So everything they tell me is for the sake of Allah. I believe my father when he says he fears Allah. I believe my mother when she says she fears Allah. And they're only doing it for my akhirah. But if we teach our children about halal and haram, and we're asking them to do something haram, hey, you know what? You can lie about this, it's fine. You can make this up. They hear us telling somebody a scenario when it's not actually real, right? Our children are not going to respect us. If we tell them to just stay away from haram and do halal, they're not going to respect us, right? So the next portion of the question is, and I'll keep this one short, inshallah. Also, what should we do when we think about questions like, how was Allah always there, and what was before Allah? Well, the questioner is speaking very eloquently, because this is a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, whenever you think of, I'll give you the elaborate version of the hadith is that shaitan comes to the believers and says that, because the believer is thinking, this came from Allah, and Allah created my parents, and Allah created their parents' parents, and Allah created them, and Allah created Adam alayhi salam, right? And Allah created the first of creation. But then who created Allah? This is a part of the hadith, right? Rasulullah says, if this thought comes to you, say, La ilaha illallah, wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulk wa lahul hamd, wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. Right? This dua, this dhikr that we say on a regular basis, if we think and contemplate and we take a break from that thought and reflect very, very briefly on this dua, La ilaha illallah, there is none worthy of worship but Allah. There is nothing that we associate with Allah. There's no concept of Allah or God except for Allah Himself. La ilaha illallah. Wahdahu, in His oneness. La sharika lah, and He has no partners. Lahul mulk, to Him belongs the kingdom, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa lahul hamd, and all praise belongs to Him. Wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir, and Allah is capable of doing everything. Yes, capable of doing everything. From the thought that you've had of what came before Allah, the idea of thinking of Allah appropriately through this dua that He wants you to, He will help you conquer that doubt that shaitan is putting in your heart, starting from that thought and everything else, right? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for thabat, for protection, and to stay steadfast. Do we have any questions from the brothers or the sisters, inshallah? And I think there's a microphone coming towards the sisters, inshallah. But brothers, until the microphone goes their way, do you guys have any questions? No? All right. Let me see if I can find a short one until the mic gets there. I know I have a horrible habit of going off on tangents. Somebody has just asked. How do you gauge the balance between receiving money for Islamic work or your Islamic work and doing Islamic work for free? That's a great question. If this individual is asking me personally, there's a general sentiment amongst people, geographically, wherever they live, and based on the understanding of Islam that they have, right? For instance, even in the past, Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah was of the opinion that it is prohibited to seek wealth and money for teaching Islam, whether it's teaching academically or going and giving lectures or whatever the case is. And we respect that opinion, right? And some people, especially living in the West, will say, hey, you need to be compensated, again, that word, compensated for your time. You should charge people an honorarium wherever you go. But that doesn't take away the fact that Rasulullah actually through the Baytul Mal and the funding, even that Umar radiallahu anh carried out, actually had people on a payroll by the government, Islamic government, and many Muslim governments do that, where they have al-waqf and al-awqaf, where they have people appointed that are paid by the government, not individuals. So I think there's a healthy balance there, that if it is institution-based or if it is a governmental level or on a level of an Islamic government of scholars being on a payroll to teach, something that was instituted by the Baytul Mal and Umar radiallahu anh, I think that's fine. But I think even people who are teaching Islam and they're being compensated for their teaching, this is my personal view, that we should all have those instances or those events or those teaching circles where we're teaching people free of charge, because not everyone could afford it, right? But let's just say that somebody dedicates their entire life, whether it's teaching virtually Islamic studies or in person, and that's their profession, they made their profession out of it, right? And scholars from the past, some of them consider that debatable, some of them didn't. And scholars of the present, some of them considered that debatable, and some of them considered it completely okay. Meaning that making a livelihood 100% completely out of teaching Islam and making money from it, right? Even if that individual, again, this is my personal take on it, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, is that even if there's a person who Allah has entrusted with the Quran and the Hadith of Rasulullah and fiqh and knowledge and those things that are linked to it, even if their life, their commitment to their family of earning money is through teaching Islamic studies, they should still have those circles of knowledge teaching people free of charge. Wallahu alam, that's just my personal take on it. Do the sisters have any questions? There's a mic by the sister's side, right? Okay, jazakallah khair. Just give us 1 second here as we just get a little clarity on that, inshallah. Go ahead, brother. You had a question? Yes. What is my opinion on غير مقلد? So غير مقلد, when we say that as far as in the Indian subcontinent, we have Arabic words, obviously, for even in our own language of Urdu, right? In Urdu, we say غير مقلد, which means غير مقلد, meaning they don't do taqlid of a madhab, right? So غير مقلد, basically, if you were to translate it into Islamic terminology, means somebody who doesn't follow a madhab or doesn't believe in following a madhab. And that all across the Muslim world, there's various people with ideas that actually will say it's haram to follow a madhab, and it can fall into the grounds of bid'ah and shirk. May Allah protect us from those types of thoughts and ideas. And there's people on the other side of the spectrum who believe that it is fard, you have to follow a madhab in every opinion of Islam that you follow. And there is a middle balance, to answer your question. First, let's just answer, is it haram to follow a madhab? No, it's not haram to follow a madhab of the deen as long as it's a reputable deen, meaning madhab mu'tabar, which we say in fiqh language, which is a madhab that is recognized by the ummah from the generations of the tabi'een all the way to our time, which people generally say the four madhabs of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, and Imam Shafi'i and Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahumullah. There's other madhahib also that people follow, the madhab of Imam Ibn Hazm, which is also a recognized madhab from amongst Sunni Islam, right? And there's a few other madhahib that people may follow that are still considered Sunni Islam for Sunnis, right? But people who don't follow a madhab, I think, this is my personal take on it, that it's a trick on words. What do I mean by that? Nobody is saved from taqleed in fiqh. Nobody is saved. If somebody says they're a ghayr muqallid, I would say to them, what is your source of you deriving rules and regulations and jurisprudence from the Quran or the Hadith? They would say, I just follow the Quran and Hadith. Then I would say to them, who's interpreting those verses for you to know, to make sure that you're following the proper extrapolation and context from the Quran and from the Hadith? Now, I'm going to unpack this. If I get a little too detailed, someone just raise your hand and say, brother, you're going too much off on tangent. So Sheikh Ihab, I'm going to give you, I respect your mind. So if I'm going off too much on a tangent, just do this to me and then I'll know that I'm doing too much. Jazakallah khairan, I just volunteered you without your consent. What I mean by this is, nobody is saved from doing taqleed. Anybody can say that I am following the opinion of this scholar that says this and this and this. Then they're on that scholar's madhab. It is very inconsistent in Islam on a juristic level and jurisprudence, on a level of jurisprudence, to say that I don't actually follow a madhab. That's not true. Everybody follows a madhab. If somebody says literally, I open up the Quran and I open up Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and the books of Hadith and I do my own research and I come to my own conclusion, I would say to them, congratulations, you have formed your own madhab. They're using their own intuition and their understanding and tools of Islam to follow Islam, which means that they have formed their own madhab. So the next question to me for them would be, who has given you ijazah to do so? Who gave you a sanad from the Sharia, somebody who was recognized of having a sanad in the Quran and Hadith and in fiqh in order to pass that verdict or understand those verdicts, right? That's what I mean by nobody is safe from. So anybody who says they're ghayr muqallid, they're actually not. They're doing taqleed of something. Okay? Did I answer your question, inshallah? Okay, jazakallah khairan. Yes. Very good. The brother asked a question of, can we follow two separate madhahib, for instance, the madhab of Imam Shafi'i and Imam Hanifa? Very good. I'll backtrack a little bit to make everybody's life a lot easier, inshallah, even getting into madhahib. The maxim in the Sharia, and I know we discussed this before, but it's very much worth mentioning. The maxim or the axiom of the Sharia, meaning a principle of the Sharia, is al-ammi la madhhaba lahu. That the layperson means somebody who's not a specialist in the Sharia, they actually don't have a madhhab. So what is their madhhab? Is just to go ask somebody of knowledge or the imam of their masjid, right? Somebody locally. That's why it's really important to ask opinions of people who are local to you. Or if you're traveling, if you're going to a masjid and you're not sure of how to do a certain thing, you ask the imam or the resident scholar of that masjid, ask them a question, they give you your answer, then that's what you follow. That's actually what Islam is obliging somebody who's not a specialist in the deen. Madahib is very important to follow madahib, of course, in Islam, meaning of the four imams or anybody else of the madahib, whatever you choose and say your madhab is. If you're saying that your madhab is a madhab, I don't know, of Imam Ibn Hazm or Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, then it's important to follow that madhab, which is actually the madhab of Ahmad bin Hanbal, rahimahullah. If you're saying that, you have to understand that it's not expected for everyone to know the madhab that they were born into very, very well. People who have studied their own madhabs, meaning as far as scholars, are still not perfect in that specific madhab, which is why we have different classifications of even somebody who's a mujtahid. A mujtahid are classifications of people who are at the highest level of Islamic jurisprudence. You have a mujtahid in al-madhab, somebody who's a mujtahid specifically in the madhab itself. And then you have mujtahid an itlaq, mujtahid which is referred to as mujtahid al-mutlaq, who is a mujtahid meaning that they've developed their own usul for people to extrapolate and follow, or to be as a reference to people, right? As the four imams are. So to answer your question, it's not obliged on somebody that doesn't know how to do something to actually say this is not a part of my madhab, I shouldn't be following this. Rather, ask somebody of knowledge, and if they give you your answer, that's your madhab, right? Now, if somebody really is, splitting hairs, and they want to be very detail-oriented, and it's not expected for them to, by the Sharia, to say, I'm for instance Hanafi, and this is an opinion of Imam al-Shafi'i, should I be following it? Well, I would say to you, and this is just my personal opinion, I'm not saying that I have the best answer, I'm just giving my personal opinion. I would say the person doesn't have to go that far to do so. They would just ask somebody of knowledge that they know and ask them what they should be following. That's my personal opinion. Wallahu alam. The next question that we can take, inshallah, from the questions are what does the Quran say, or why does the Quran say that paradise will have rivers of wine when alcohol is haram? That's a great question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this world, and Allah only has a right to tell us what is allowed in this world and what is not allowed in this world. No one else has a right to do so. Meaning, if Allah also says in the Quran that Muhammad ﷺ has a right to tell us what's halal and haram, then that means by extension, Muhammad ﷺ has a right to tell us what is halal and haram. If in the Quran and in the hadith of Rasulullah ﷺ that people who are entrusted with knowledge, like Ahl al-Dhikr, when Allah says in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, ask the people who know, meaning of knowledge. If you don't know, then those people are going to be the people who are going to tell us based on fiqh and understanding what is halal and what's haram, right? But at the end, what it comes down to is Allah telling us, Allah having the right to tell us what is halal and haram, right? In the akhirah, we have to understand, number one, Allah has the right to tell us through the Quran and the hadith of Rasulullah to tell us what's allowed in Jannah and what's not allowed in Jannah. They're two different worlds. The rules of the world don't apply to the rules of the akhirah. They're two completely different worlds. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so merciful, He actually told us that the life of the people, and Rasulullah and the Sahaba told us the life of the people and how heavily they were dependent on alcohol and wine, and how much revenue and how much culture and richness, quote unquote, it added to their culture, to Allah eventually step by step prohibiting it, but gave them an exchange in the akhirah. Allah didn't have to do that. Allah didn't have to say that there's wine, rivers of wine, right, in Jannah, in the Quran. He didn't have to even have that for us. But how merciful is Allah that He takes something away from in this world, us in this world, and He gives us its exchange in the akhirah. That's especially coming from Allah, where Allah has a right to do whatever He wants and not give us incentives. Allah gives us millions of incentives, right? And thousands in the Quran. The second thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does in the Quran is He tells us the properties of the wine of this dunya, and He gives us the properties of the wine in the akhirah. What does He say in Surah Al-Waqi'ah and in Surah Al-Haqqa about the wine? It doesn't cause what? It doesn't cause any type of drunkenness or giddiness of the properties of this world that the wine does. It's a different experience. Because people know that when they get drunk, and you could see this even about Umar radiallahu anhu and the regret that they had about when they were drunk and after they became sober, the regrets that they had, right? Allah tells us that the wine that's in the akhirah, not only does it not cause giddiness and foolishness, but there's no such thing as a regret, or there's no such thing as its pleasure or its ecstatic feeling ending. Allah is saying that we have given you this wine in Jannah to be completely pure the way Allah wants for it to be pure, but rest assured that it's going to give you lots of pleasure. And Allah didn't have to do that. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So to answer the individual's question, inshallah, number one, the properties are different of the wine of this world and the akhirah. And number two, Allah sets the standard if we believe that Allah tells the truth and He's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He has the right to make whatever halal and haram for us in this dunya, and in the akhirah He has the right to tell us what is halal and haram, and that's only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one else has the right to do that. One more, and then we can take one from the brothers and sisters, inshallah. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the person said, please tell me where in the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made LGBTQ and homosexuality haram in the Quran. So, if the person wants a one-word answer, there's multiple verses in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-A'raf made homosexuality haram, and we can get into detail even in specifics. Surah Al-Ankabut, which is Surah 29 verse 28, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited homosexuality, meaning the actions of homosexuality, acting upon homosexuality. And in Surah Al-Qamar, which is Surah number 54, verse number 34, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-A'raf, which is Surah number 7, verses 80 and 81. But let me be very, very clear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say, Rasulullah didn't say that if somebody has thoughts of which are pertaining to homosexuality or same gender attraction, those thoughts are not sins. Islam is a very merciful deen. Allah didn't say that if you have those thoughts and those tendencies, it's haram. It just means that number one, that you have to seek counsel and get help. And if it's curable, if it's not curable, that's actually insignificant, because that's Allah's test to the individual, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is concerned about, what Rasulullah is concerned about, is acting upon or the impulsivity of those thoughts and desires. Every single one of us has impulses, not just pertaining to sexuality, of anything. We have impulses of buying, right? Oh, Amazon Prime Day on the 11th and 12th. Don't ask me how I know that, right? Oh, I got to start making my... It's so easy to be impulsive. It's so easy to be impulsive. Oh, an alert comes up. I didn't even ask for it. An alert comes up. You know, Allah forgive us for agreeing to notifications, right? But you get these notifications, oh my God, it's only $5. Ooh, $2? And I don't want to talk about giving people ideas, but you know, Amazon has a new competition called Temu. I don't know if, I'm pretty sure all of you have heard of that, right? I literally talked to many people. They said, oh my God, I bought so much stuff, and it was only $2 for sunglasses, $5 for jeans. I was like, how many things did you buy? Like 27? I was like, I mean, that's accomplished. They've accomplished what the app was for. Make everything very cheap, made from China, majority of the stuff. Bring it in for as cheap as possible, but you're going to buy lots of stuff. But it's all impulsive. You can all do it with an app. You just click it. You don't have to go to the store, get into your car, make sure you have gas in your car, go to some place which is 10 or 15 minutes away, and then close your car door, lock your door, have that in the back of your mind, walk into a store, open the doors, whether it's you have to pull or it's automatic doors, then go search for something, and then stand in a line, and then pay for it. Hopefully the person at the cash register is understanding, or you have questions for them. Hopefully that's not going to be awkward. That's what people used to have to do to buy something. But now I can get a notification, buy something within 15 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. All that stuff in between, those interactions are cut out, right? It's benefit, but do you think the shaitan's going to let this impulsive behavior go to waste for him? If he promised Allah that he's going to come from the front, from the back, from the right, from the left. I'm not saying buying things online is haram. Brothers and sisters, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that there's trade-offs to everything. Everything has a trade-off, especially when it comes to shaitan. When Allah tells you that he's aduwwun mubin, that he is the most clear enemy, meaning a majority of problems that you're going to have in this world, the enemy that caused, or the impetus of this, usually is shaitan. Usually. But he convinces us that he doesn't exist, right? The fact that he convinces that he doesn't exist, we think it's the other person's fault. And we blame that person. In reality, we didn't take the proper measures to make shaitan our enemy and not the person, right? So that being said, why am I saying all this? All of us have impulsive behaviors, and we're trained to now on a regular basis, whether it's for work or whether it's for your daily life. So impulsive that if our children are crying, we're going to be impulsive on communicating with somebody with our phone, or purchasing something while our children are crying, or doing something else and fighting and causing a storm or injuring themselves, right? Allah protect us. So since the world is welcoming this impulsivity, it doesn't mean that we welcome our desires, especially related to sexuality. Just because you have those desires, it doesn't mean that Islam is oppressive for forbidding you from it. Islam actually prohibits many compulsive and impulsive behaviors, not just pertaining to sexuality, right? The dilemma now comes about is when somebody's defined as a human being, you take the human out and just defined as their sexual lifestyle, that becomes a problem because Islam is oppressive, because it says you're not allowed to have homosexual relations, right? So, to answer the individual's question, yes, it's in the Quran. There's actually a whole nation that was destroyed because of the action that they invented. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that the people of Lut in the Quran, they invented this. Ma sabaqakum. Allah says that nobody has done this action of sodomy before you. It was invented by the Qawm of Lut alayhi salam. And Allah punished them for that fahisha, for that very fahisha that they committed in the Quran. Allah gives us detailed depictions of these people that they go to men. Allah is referring to men now in specific. They approach other men in sexual manners with fahisha and not women. So Allah tells us that women are the default for men, and men are the default for women. And it's not open to interpretation. It's an objective truth from Allah. Us as believers believe that this is an objective truth. It's not open to opinion, and it's not subjective. If you have that issue of having same-sex attraction or same-gender attraction, that's something that you need to work on. And there's many avenues Islamically to work on those. And we have to look at the lifestyle, right? Again, like I said, I don't like talking too much. I'm not gonna. You'll never find me on the minbar or in front of the masjid promoting any political party, meaning the Democrats or the Republicans. I will never do that in the masjid. But I will tell you that there are certain political ploys being played as of right now to gain people's votes, because the elections are coming in very, very close. Catering and the sexuality sphere is being very much used for, obviously, votes for Republicans and Democrats, both being quote unquote on the opposite side of the spectrum. Why am I mentioning this? I'm not telling you to vote for this person, but there's an individual, and the only reason why I'm mentioning his name is because it sparked a lot of research within me and many Muslims. Robert Kennedy, who's the nephew of John F. Kennedy, or the grandson? The nephew of John F. Kennedy is running for office, but he brought up something very, very interesting in some of his interviews. I'm not talking about voting for him. He had actually raised many issues about environmental chemicals that are in the food supply and water, and how it's changing human beings sexually and their inclinations. This is real. People have been talking about, phthalates. If you guys don't know about phthalates, I would heavily research phthalates and how, meaning microplastics, and how it affects testosterone levels in men, and many other chemicals of how they actually, plastics, right? That's why you have like BPA-free plastic and all that stuff, right? Why did all that stuff come about? Is because of, obviously, people pushing, because of the plastics and the effects that it has in on a microscopic level on the body. Why am I mentioning this? Well, phthalates, which are found in microplastics, and other herbicides that Robert Kennedy Jr. had brought into many research spheres, and he was actually very accurate, that there's certain herbicides and microplastics in specific, let me finish that point, actually affect, and it's understood in research now of how it affects testosterone in men and sexual behavior in men, and the inclination that men even just have for sex. Very, very simple. Herbicides also, I have it in my notes, so I want to give you guys the name. I'm going to do this. I usually don't do this, but I'm just going to look up this name in specific so you can research this. Glyphosate is one of them. Jazakallah khairan. This one starts with an A, and I just forgot this, and I have it in my notes. So please just bear with me here. Very, very important. But Jazakallah khairan for the glyphosate. We know a brother here, mashallah, that can be very valuable for our research in this. I'm almost there. Yes. Atrazine, phthalates, and glyphosate, like the brother mentioned. But atrazine is actually super important. I am not a biologist. I am not from the medical profession. I would just give you this just to say that the claims that I'm making, are these correct based on the research that I read. And this is related to a verse, but I'm going to mention the verse at the end. So atrazine itself, they did a study on animals, and in specific in frogs. Why do they do it on frogs? Is because this herbicide, atrazine, is in water supply. It's used in water. And this herbicide, they took 43 frogs, or 43 or 47 frogs, put them in water, and put a little bit of atrazine in the water. You can read the research. The research is very well documented. 3 of those male frogs, they were all male frogs, all 3 of them became actually females and developed into being a female. This is scary. And half of those frogs didn't show any type of signs of male frogs as far as reproductive wise. Actually reversed the inclination that a frog would have biologically and physiologically. That herbicide, phthalates, glyphosates, all of these are in all of the supplies of all of our foods in our drink. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is 100% real, and this is the world that we're living in, which is why we have to have rahmah. Why are people talking about this influx? Now, the extreme left will say the influx of people coming out of the closet, that's what we used to call it, of claiming this homosexual lifestyle, is because it was shunned before and because it was stigmatized. But that's not actually true. It's not stigmatized anymore. It's championed now. Muslims, we believe on a general level, all fitna in fasad. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ, that all types of fasad, meaning mischievousness and corruption, have occurred on land and on sea from what man's hands have committed. But then what does Allah say? We're going to show them the result. Why? لِيُذِيقَهُمْ, so they can taste of the corruption that they caused in this world. Let's give them a taste of what this corruption and this fasad caused to them. And we're bearing the fruits now. The end of times wasn't just Muhammad ﷺ announcing, look how beautiful Allah and His Rasul are. Allah being first, and by extension of worshipping Allah is following Muhammad ﷺ and giving seriousness to what Muhammad ﷺ told us, right? When Muhammad ﷺ said that women will be like men and men will be like women, it happened more than anybody ever expected. It happened to the level of people will be able to bully you to say no. Outwardly, they may be a male, you're going to call me a female. And if you're not okay with that, I can take you to court. That's how true the saying of Muhammad ﷺ became. Right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also gave us reasons and paths to stay away from that. And some of those are not corrupting, and obviously a lot of it has to do with, mass production and, being very capitalistic in our thinking of, we have to make profits no matter what people are going to suffer. We have to make monetary gain no matter what happens to people, and we're seeing the result of that. You know what that verse, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ, when we were growing up, and some people in the 70s or 80s will tell you this, even scholars of the 70s, of the 80s in the West and in the world, they kind of related that to a lot of the other fasad and fitnas, but the dumping of garbage in the ocean. I don't know if any of you, I see you nodding, brother, but there's a lot of people that were talking about this in the 80s. People were talking about this in the mimbar. We're dumping garbage. Can you imagine? This was the fitna. We're dumping garbage as a human populace, especially coming from the West, dumping everything in the ocean, and now the ocean's filling up. And they use this verse that what man's hands have committed on land and in sea. But what happened in land and in sea, that dumping of all those materials and stuff, obviously eventually is going to make its way to earth and make its land. Right? To land. And we've induced all of these ingredients and products to people for the sake of attaining wealth, knowing for many people actually knew the causes and harms of these various ingredients or materials, but it's the fastest way to make money. And this is what Allah is referring to, Rasulullah is referring to as far as greed and accumulating wealth, right? Al-hakum ut-takathur, right? That just accumulating lots and lots is what's keeping you busy. That's your entertainment. That's your goal in life now, right? And that's actually what capitalism is. Allah protect us, right? So to make a long story short, nobody is telling a person in Islam, no scholar that I've ever met, no scholar that you've ever met, no scholar that we've actually met in history ever said that if you're having homosexual thoughts and tendencies, that's an act of sin and that actually means you're homosexual. Nobody's ever said that. It just means that you're tested with something. Maybe it's a phase, maybe it's not, right? Acting upon that is what's actually considered haram. Now, dare I say that even the word homosexuality has its etymology originally where the word actually came from. The original word that people used to use homosexuality, just made it a little more scientific to make it more acceptable, was sodomy. That's all it was. But to make it more palatable to people, we called it homosexuality, and then we called it, or not we, alhamdulillah, people called it gay. Gay actually means happy. How many of you guys remember Ahmed Deedat, rahimahullah? Ahmed Deedat, nobody remembers him? From the forefather of Jazakumullah khairan. Ahmed Deedat was not just a comparative religions person and scholar in his own right. He was actually a very wise individual, and he would joke about certain things, social issues, because of the presence that he had and the way he did it. Nobody actually really had a problem with it. So he says, what is this new thing, gay? Like, what is this thing that people are calling gay? And he said, when we were growing up, gay means, you're at the park. He grew up in South Africa, right? And you could tell by his accent, gay, when we were growing up, means, the kids, they're having a gay old time. They're playing at the park. Everyone's happy and this. And he said, what these people are practicing, that's not gay. These are sodomites. He's talking about specific individuals that are promoting a homosexual lifestyle, right? This is Ahmed Deedat who said this in the 70s, right? So when the word gay came about, there's many people actually lexically, meaning linguistically, had a problem with it. Meaning that why are you taking a word, why are you hijacking this word, which means happiness and having a good time, into a sexual orientation? Do you guys understand where I'm going by this? It actually has a train and method of making this lifestyle palatable to people and acceptable to people. And this is obviously by way of shaitan also, right? It's a very satanic and a very dajjalic way of convincing people of doing something haram, right? What do? You take a word which originally was wrong to do, the action of, and then you make it more palatable to people. We see it on a regular basis. We see businesses do this with many other things, right? And I'll conclude with this, meaning I'll move on to the next, because there were a few questions that are related to the LGBTQ issue that this person mentioned within the questions. Is we should all ask ourselves a question, just why is it that the most unhealthy and possibly toxic food chain actually makes the most money internationally? McDonald's, for instance. How is it that that type of food makes the most money? How is it that there's a McDonald's? I think in the United States there's a statistic in most states where it's at every mile or every 2 miles of United States, or majority, or many states. I shouldn't say majority, I take that back. I don't want to misspeak. But in the states that it's very prevalent, I think it's every mile. And just think, why is it, right? Why is it that close in proximity to other branches, right? How did it become that way, that people are readily consuming something which they know is so bad for them? How powerful was the marketing and making something so palatable, changing things and changing commercials and everything to make the most unhealthy thing the most lovable thing to America? How did that happen? It's not just America anymore. It's the UK, it's France, it's everywhere, right? Allah protects us. It's in the vicinity of the Haram in Mecca, right? A place where it's haram to uproot a tree. Globalization has hit the Haram, right? So it's something to think about. How does that happen? It's by way of taking something and making it beautified to human beings and convincing them it's something that it's not. And that's the same thing that happened with this lifestyle. So again, I reiterate, we're not saying that somebody in Islam is considered a practicing homosexual of the LGBTQ community plus that they're having thoughts or inclinations or tendencies that they're not acting upon. That's not what we're saying. We're talking about the lifestyle of promoting it and telling Muslims that it's okay. Dare I say that if somebody is practicing a homosexual lifestyle and they're doing it on their own and they're asking Allah for forgiveness, that is much better than somebody saying that homosexuality is not haram in Islam. It's okay to be a part of the LGBTQ plus lifestyle, and Islam doesn't have anything prohibiting that. That is an act of kufr. That is something we don't do. But if somebody does have a weakness And they're ashamed of it because it should be the same way a Muslim who is a heterosexual and having sex outside of wedlock, committing adultery or fornication before marriage, if they're doing it in their own privacy and they're not telling anybody about it and they're asking Allah for forgiveness, that is much better, and they're still in the folds of Islam. Again, please understand what I'm saying. If there is somebody who is very sexually active, committing fornication before marriage, and in marriage committing adultery but knowing it's haram, it is still a huge haram. It's still from the kaba'ir, from the grave sins, but they're still in the boundaries of Islam. But even Rasulullah in a hadith where he says what? The person who's committing zina is not Muslim. What does he mean by that? In the act of them committing zina or adultery, their iman leaves them until they're done with the act and the iman comes back to them. And the person who's stealing, the same thing. And the person who's killing, in that act, their iman is lifted from them, and when they're done with the act, the iman returns to them. Which is why we don't commit those acts, because if Allah takes our soul in those acts, then it's up to Allah where we go. That being said, if that person asks for forgiveness and doesn't propagate their sins and tell people about their sins, that person is much better than saying, oh yeah, Islam is actually very harsh towards the LGBTQ community. There's nothing wrong with being a homosexual or gay or binary or whatever it is, transgender. That's where it becomes an act of kufr, because you're going against mutawatir verses of the Quran and hadith of Rasulullah, which are substantiated through ijma' of the ummah and in history. We can take a question, inshallah, from the group, and then we can conclude. Yes, sir.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Assalam.
So I have my kids who are just going to the elementary school. I think in the elementary school itself, they are sowing the seeds to express yourself. They use the term express yourself. Maybe back in my subcontinent, all right, we say this is good, this is not good. Our parents teach, right? But here the feeling is to ask the kids to express yourself. And I think maybe 2 years down the line, I think that I might need to speak to my kids, which my parents didn't even speak when I was in 11th grade or 12th grade. My kids are just in the elementary.
Yeah.
And some things, right, Allah's beautiful creations, rainbow, right? We are now hesitant to buy a t-shirt for the kids for rainbow also.
I'm sorry, what? We get what?
Rainbow, t-shirt with a rainbow.
Oh, yes, of course.
So how to manage the kids? How to make sure that they are guided by the Islamic environment?
Yes, Jazakallah khairan.
So with the Islamic school also, right, it's becoming very expensive here. So, and how to bring up the, make sure that our kids are in a right path.
Yes, Jazakallah khairan. That's a great question. That's the sentiment of many Muslims, especially many upright Muslims. It's also the sentiment of devout Christians and devout Jews and people who are just very principle-based. But rightfully so, Muslims should feel the most ghira. Muslims should feel the most protectiveness for their ummah because we're Muslims and because it's the best, because Allah says so. And we are the most noble people and we are the best of people because Allah says so. We have to have the highest principles. And what I just said, that's not an opinion. We're not the best, meaning that's our opinion. That's objectively the truth. Not because of our physical selves, but because of the belief that we have. And if you're the best, which we are, you have to have the most protectiveness of your deen because of that deen, right? So that being said, there's many avenues of approaching this. One of them is by way of education and information. I'm just going to give you something very practical. I'm not going to give you anything else because it's worked for me and my family. The first thing is that this whole entire agenda of the LGBTQ community and everything else that's out there actually forced Muslims to understand their deen better. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran tells us that He's going to test us, what? To differentiate who is on the deen of Allah and who's not. It's a filtration process, right? And may Allah make us from amongst those. I'm not saying I'm here with the microphone, quote unquote, sheikh, and I'm the best person. That's not what I'm saying. Because Allah, if He wants, if I don't value my deen, or if Allah wants, He can change my iman. May Allah protect me. And He could change my heart. Right? Because He's the muqallib al-qulub. If we have that mindset, number one. And number two, we can't be shy of the verses of the Quran and the content of the hadith of Rasulullah in pertaining to gender relations, and sexuality. We've done that for a long time, which is fine. Meaning it happened, right? Because of many of us may come from Eastern cultures or whatever culture it is, or Western cultures and subcultures, which made it very, very stigmatized to talk about sexuality, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the most haya, as Rasulullah said in the Hadith Qudsi. Allah has the most haya. And He spoke about these things. Why am I saying this? How do we start talking to our children about sexuality according to their age? Right? I did a seminar on this once, and I'm just going to summarize this for you very, very briefly, because this is what it comes down to. If our children, number one, understand that we can talk to them about these things from a young age, because we should. Our children came from us, so they should hear it from us, right? Our children shouldn't be said, hey, don't talk about this in front of me, or don't be disrespectful, and they go learn from Disney, and they learn from their school, and they learn from Netflix, and they learn from everybody else what sexuality is. No. They learn from us. But someone can say, oh my God, this is a daunting task. And I'm sorry if you guys feel uncomfortable about this. I'm going to use the word. It's allowed to use this word in the masjid. It's okay to talk to our children about sex, but how do we talk to them about it? A very proactive way. Number one, this may seem like a joke to some people, but it's very, very simple. We teach our children the names of what their private parts are. That's how you start off. You don't make silly names for children's private parts when you're teaching them. And we don't make up what it is. We actually teach them how to use it and how to wash and how to do all that properly, as Islam taught us. Sex is a daunting task to talk about, but you don't talk about it right away. You don't talk about procreation and the methods of procreation right away. You talk to them according to their age, because Allah and Rasul instructed us to talk to people according to their level, right? So you talk about that. And then, look, someone may think this is controversial, but there's nothing Islamically wrong about this. There's nothing wrong from a young age with your children witnessing husband and wife showing simple affection towards each other. If children grow up seeing their mother and father never hugging each other, looking at each other in their eyes, or kissing each other on the cheeks, right, in front of them, I know to some people this is really weird. But is there anything un-Islamic? The first thing we have to ask is there anything un-Islamic for a man to kiss his wife in front of his children? Is there anything un-Islamic about that, brothers and sisters? No. It's actually very healthy. It's actually very healthy. No, I'm not saying have complete foreplay in front of your children. I would never say that. But I'm saying it's good and healthy for your children to see how a husband and wife behave with each other. And don't make it, just be genuine with your spouses, right? Be genuine with your spouses in front of your children. That's what a family is for. They're the ones who have to witness this healthy relationship. If children don't witness a healthy relationship with their parents, who are they going to witness it from? Disney Plus? Right? They have to witness that from us. You know, this is where it's very, very important. Children don't listen to us when we tell them to do something. What do they learn from? By witnessing us, by watching us. Right? Couple that with you showing and us showing affection to our spouses in front of our children in a healthy way, right? And then us talking to them about gender interaction, that has a profound effect. So what I'm asking us to be is be human beings in front of our families. That's what I'm asking us to do, right? So that's the first thing. The second is, don't be ashamed about talking about the private parts which Allah and the Rasul talked about in the Quran and the Hadith to your children. And as they get older, we talk about marriage. I'll tell you straight up, look, I'll use myself as an example. I'm glad for the tutelage of my teachers who talked to me about this. The first time all of this marriage and, what they call straight marriage and gay marriage thing happened. When is Adhan, by the way? 10:15? Okay. I told my daughter, she was 7 years old at the time. And I said to her, I was talking about marriage, and I just said, in marriage, husband and wife, they have disagreements and this and that. Just because you see me and mother arguing, it doesn't mean that we hate each other. We actually love each other, but we want to make sure that, that you understand that we're being respectful to you too and all that. And especially as a father, I told her that I'm glad you're born and that you're our child, because it makes me be obedient to Allah because of you, because I have to see how I talk to my spouse now, your mother, because of you being present. So Allah puts people there for reasons. So number one, you make the child feel special, right? Because they are special. The next part is that we make sure that, and this is what I did, I explained to her, look, there's halal relationships that Allah is okay with, and there's haram relationships that Allah is not okay with. And I don't even think I use the word halal or haram. I just made it about love of Allah. That if you love Allah, and we do, and Allah loves us, He expects us to have certain relationships. He doesn't allow us to touch, meaning men and women touch each other and kiss each other before marriage. They're not allowed to do that. Touching is not allowed, and kissing is not allowed, unless if it's an emergency. Right? And it was easy to have this conversation. And I said, men are only allowed to marry women, and women are allowed to marry men. Men are not allowed to marry men, and women are not allowed to marry men. Women are not allowed to marry women, and men are not allowed to marry men. This happened a long time ago. This conversation happened maybe almost 10 years ago. This is when the whole gay marriage thing and everything started. What do you think her answer was? Men marry men? She's only 7 years old. Fitra. This is the fitra, the number one evidence of homosexuality not being allowed. Right? And she said, wait, well, women, like, I think she said mamas marry mamas. That's what she said, because that's what she thinks about women. She thinks of mama, right? I said, yeah, but that's not allowed. We don't say to our children from a young age, oh, it's despicable, it's disgusting that people have. No, we say Allah doesn't love it, because that's the truth. We don't want to teach them hate of something where hate is not meant to be introduced. We want to teach them Allah doesn't love this, and Allah loves this. Allah loves that when you want to get married, that you get married and you have children. Allah loves that if you do that. Allah doesn't love if a man marries a man, or a man has a relationship, sexual relationship with a man. Allah doesn't love that, and we don't do anything that Allah loves. And by that way, there's much more explanation to this, but by this path, by this track, it's very easy to explain sex to children. It's not a daunting task, because they will start giving you reassurance that they agree with you because of their fitrah. The same way, I think about it this way. Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he wanted to sacrifice Ismail alayhi salam, he was very cordial, and he said, if Allah asks you to do it, do it. Right? Why does Allah tell us that? Because if you take the proper steps, and your children will start agreeing with you because of their fitrah, it'll be much more easier of a task to teach them their deen. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for thabat. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept everything that we do. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us and the youth and the young of this ummah on their deen, and not waver because of ideology. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.